according to their subjects. Technology isn't divided up that way. Technology is divided up according to its products, not according to its subjects. It's according to what we can do with that knowledge that we divide up our technology, as opposed to how we divide up our sciences. So for an example, from medicine, which is a techne in Greek, a paradigmatic one actually. Understanding how to use lasers is not a part of human biology, right? It's a part of optics. Optics study lasers, that's the subject of lasers, or lasers are the subject of optics. Human body is the study of human biology. But to do a certain kind of medicine, that is laser eye surgery, you need to be able to use lasers. Right? So using lasers is a part of medicine, because medicine is defined according to its product, health. Whereas it's not a part of biology, because biology is divided according to its subject, the body, or organisms. So we have these two different sort of classification systems of knowledge, and the Greeks had very similar, if not identical, classification systems. And I'd suggest this isn't a coincidence. That the reason that that we have these two sets of classification systems is because we get it from the Greeks originally. So what having a techne or a craft gives you is a kind of power. It gives you a kind of ability, a capacity. And what it gives you, along with having the tools, is the ability to produce whatever it is that that craft gives you the knowledge of how to produce. So for example, if you have medicine, if you have the craft of medicine, you have the power to produce health, assuming you have the right tools. And if you have the power of carpentry, then you have the power to build a table, assuming you have the right tools. So there's an identification between someone who has the knowledge and someone who has the power. In a way, techne is where knowledge and power intersect. When you have the knowledge, you have the power, and when you have the power, you're that kind of craftsperson. So when you have the knowledge of how to heal, you have the power to heal, and that makes you a doctor. So what I suggest is that this idea of techne, or craft, actually maps on extremely well to our modern conception of technology, and that this concept is actually the concept that both Thrasymachus and Socrates are dealing with in the discussion that we'll be talking about today. So any questions about this before we go on? All right, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to just do what we've been doing, which is go through the argument, and go through the various steps of the argument, including some of the digressions and so forth, and try to get at how these ideas of technology and virtue pan out in the course of the discussion. So, first, when Thrasymachus roars in, he has a criticism of Socrates. And it's actually in some ways a familiar criticism that we've seen before, because we've seen Socrates give criticisms like this before. And what Thrasymachus says is that Socrates is arguing that justice is advantageous, and that it is right, and that it is beneficial. But he's not actually saying what it is, or how it's beneficial, or right, or advantageous. And this isn't actually an unfair criticism. It seems that Socrates has not yet defined justice in a sufficient way. And not only that, but he hasn't explained in what way exactly it's advantageous, or right, or beneficial. And we've actually seen these kinds of criticisms before, or rather we've seen it once, which was in the Euthyphro, when Socrates said that, when Euthyphro said that he was providing service to the gods, and Socrates says, well, what kind of service? And the point is, it's not enough to say that you benefit someone. You have to say how you benefit that person. And so when Euthyphro tried this, right, and said that the gods, I serve the gods, or I benefit the gods in some way, actually, I serve the gods, Socrates called him on that and said, look, that's an incomplete definition. So, oh, and we did see a story, we saw one other time in the dialogue as well, which is when Polemarchus started talking about helping friends, right, and about partnerships. In both cases, basically Polemarchus said that it was somehow helpful or partnership, and it was incomplete. It was some kind of benefit, but it didn't say what it was specifically. But it becomes fairly clear that Thrasymachus is not Socrates very quickly. So he's launched a kind of normal, fair Socratic criticism. But the next thing you would expect from Socrates is to say, well, what kind of service? What kind of help? What kind of partnership? That's not what Thrasymachus does, and we see how much of a different kind of person he is. Thrasymachus instead forbids Socrates to use these terms. He says, you may not use the terms advantageous, or right, or beneficial. So it's not just that he's asking to clarify the answer, he's forbidding Socrates to use these terms. And this shows that somehow Thrasymachus is doing something else. What is Thrasymachus doing? He's bullying. He's trying to conquer the conversation by yelling really loud. And Socrates responds quite rightly here. Socrates, basically Thrasymachus, by doing this, turns the initiative over to Socrates, and Socrates responds quite rightly. And he says, well, just because my terms might be incomplete doesn't mean I should be forbidden to use them. It might turn out that justice is advantageous to someone in some way, and that might be part of the correct answer. You can't forbid me to give this kind of answer. So we're seeing here a kind of interchange. In a way, Socrates has made exactly the mistake Thrasymachus is calling him on. He has not said what kind of benefit justice provides. But at the same time, Thrasymachus is not acting fairly, in a way. He's insisting that Socrates not use certain kinds of terms. He's basically insisting that he should be in control of the conversation and telling Socrates that he needs Thrasymachus' permission to talk in a certain way. Yes?
I feel that that's only one part of what he's saying, because I believe the reason he gave for not allowing Socrates to use the terms like advantageous and benefit were because he said that you would just, because normally when other people use those terms, you would ask them, what does that mean? So he's saying, if you can only use those terms if you can fully explain them. But I think Socrates says that no one, and then he goes on kind of saying, well, I'm not as bright as you and stuff, blah, blah, blah. It's like, so why don't you explain them instead?
Yeah, fair enough, but he doesn't add that if in the passage, right? He just says, you may not use this kind of language. Right? So he says, you haven't explained this and you may not talk that way. And that is a slightly different thing. And we are seeing a slightly different thing where notice how the conversation is breaking down. Right? You had that sort of nice interchange, well, sort of, with Euthyphro and Socrates and so forth. And here we have a situation where the original conversation has been burst into, the whole thing is really breaking down. And we're kind of in an almost interesting dramatic dialectical moment where you have to, conversation needs to be reestablished. And part of the reason that we're in this stuck position is that Thrasymachus is not playing by the rules. Instead of asking questions and so forth, he's forbidding. And so I think you're right, that is the criticism, but I think that if is missing. Mm-hmm. And because that if is missing, this turns into a power struggle. And so Socrates immediately establishes it back, says you can't tell me what to say, basically. If the answer's there, I'm going to go there, I'm sorry. Good question. All right, so we get Thrasymachus' first definition here. It's a very brief definition.